In the SKIN.2 standard, we're talking about how does the skin act as a homeostatic organ, meaning how does it regulate internal stable environment. The standard reads, I can explain how the skin functions to maintain homeostasis within the body, and this covers sections 6.2 and 6.3 of your textbook. Okay, so this first slide again is the same that we've seen in our last video. Just to remind us, the integumentary system is not just skin, but it includes the accessory structures embedded within the skin. So we're talking hair, nails, glands, sensory receptors, etc., blood vessels, nerves. Your first new heading for today is going to be SKIN.2, Accessory Structures and Homeostasis. And so we're going to start with those accessory structures. The nails are protective coverings on the ends of our fingers and toes. They're specialized skin cells that have accumulated a lot more keratin to make them even tougher than your skin or your hair. They have a few individual parts of their own. So the nail plate is what overlies the nail bed, meaning that is the hard part that you can see. That is that pink part right here. The nail bed is what is underneath. So that's the part that attaches to the rest of your finger. That's what's getting nourished. That's what's getting blood and oxygen. And that is what is most alive and healthy. The active growing region, though, not the entire nail is not growing. If you've ever had some sort of damage done to your fingernail, then you know that that damage, you can kind of watch it grow outward as the nail ages. So the nail starts growing from a region called the lunula, which is that pale half moon shape sitting at the base of your fingernail that then grows out this way. Okay, hair follicles, another accessory structure. This is the depression within the dermis that is still epidermal cells in which the hair develops. So you'll notice based on the coloring that the epidermis, let me use a pen, that the epidermis dips way down here into the dermis to house the hair follicle and then goes all the way back up. It also includes our oil glands, our sebaceous glands here. So the hair bulb down at the base is the actively dividing hair. Much like your fingernails, it's growing at the base and then the hair grows outward. The shaft is the dead epidermal cells that make up most of the hair that you can see once it emerges from your skin. So all of the hair that you can touch on your head, that you can touch on your body, that hair is not alive. Those are dead cells with tons of keratin in them. Hair color is due largely to the amount and type of melanin. We said there were two types, phenomelanin and eumelanin, and your hair color is due to what balance of those two that you have. A little reminder here that the erector pili is that tiny muscle that can cause goosebumps, usually when you're cold or emotionally stimulated. Associated with those hair follicles, I'm going to go back for a second, associated with these hair follicles is a sebaceous gland, and these are your oil glands. So you can only get pimples in places where you have hair, which would explain why you've never had a pimple probably on the palm of your hand or the sole of your feet. You just don't have hairs there. Even if the hairs are very, very light and very, very fine, you need oil, you need hair to produce oil. So sebaceous glands are holocrine, meaning whole cell glands, that produce oil to keep your skin soft and waterproof. So they're constantly pushing out more. But they only can produce so much. So if you are showering too regularly or washing too much of this oil away, oftentimes your hair can get very dried out, your skin can get flaky. Even in the wintertime, you can't produce enough oil to keep up with how cold it is. The oil has a fancy name. These fatty materials are called sebum, and it is those whole cell chunks combined with other lipids. Excess sebum will lead to a condition that we call acne. And like I said, they were absent on the palms and soles. Okay, sweat glands. Not associated with hairs. Sweat glands on this slide are down here. So they look like coiled up little snakes, but they have one hose that goes up to the top. And they do release near where hairs come out of the skin. It makes sense not to have an extra hole, but they're not nearly as associated as the sebaceous glands are. So there's two kinds of sweat glands. Merocrine sweat glands, which just secrete sweat as a liquid, are the most common. These are the ones you're going to find all over your body that are meant to regulate your body temperature because as that sweat evaporates, the heat is sort of pulled off with it. Your apocrine sweat glands, on the other hand, are found only in your armpits and your groin areas, and they sweat in response to emotion or pain. So if you've ever been set to be a public speaker and your armpits are sweating like crazy, it's because these apocrine sweat glands are active. They usually produce a stronger odor than just heat sweat, which makes you more anxious in turn. But evolutionarily, that's to sort of signal to other humans that something is wrong and that you need help. So if someone stinks, you should be like, hey, I can smell you. You okay? All right, now onto the homeostasis side. So we talked about those accessory structures. Now, how does the skin regulate our body temperature? Well, control center is the hypothalamus. That is a piece of the brain that is trying to keep us at 98.6. It can tell when we've deviated from that set point, and it will try to fix the problem. So, when your body temperature is too high, thermoreceptors in your skin, down in the dermis, tell the brain, hey, it's too hot, we're 99 degrees. Time to do something about it. The brain then directs the dermal blood vessels, so those blood vessels that are closest to the surface, to open up and to rise a little bit. Not to leak blood, but just to get closer to the surface of the skin. By doing that, you appear red, but you release more heat. You do that more effectively. Your brain also says, let's activate your sweat glands. Let's produce this water that will evaporate and cool you aside from the vasodilation. Opposite processes happen when your body temperature gets too low. So those thermoreceptors are still the ones that tell the brain something is wrong, but this time your blood vessels are going to shrink. They're going to sink down into your dermis and preserve that heat that is rushing through your blood. Also, instead of sweating, which would make no sense when you're cold, you're going to shiver. So those little muscles are going to involuntarily contract and produce heat as a byproduct. One more slide, just a couple conditions that result from a lack of regulation of body temperature. So hyperthermia, we've maybe heard less of, can occur when you get really hot, but also when you get really humid. If one of our body's main responses is to sweat when we get too hot, when it's humid, your sweat can't evaporate, so it's not going to do anything. Your body, if you're out in the air and it's more than 98.6 degrees especially, you start to take on that extra heat because heat always goes towards areas of less heat. So your body is gaining that excess heat. And of course, this can lead to dizziness, weakness, nausea, headache, and can affect your heart. Hypothermia is just as dangerous if we get too low of body temperature. Usually this is because we're out in the cold for too long. Sometimes we can get this from illness as well. And shivering just isn't enough to fix the problem in people who are experiencing hypothermia. So oftentimes as this condition progresses, the sufferer gets confused, they get lethargic, which is like kind of slow moving. They lose consciousness, and then of course without consciousness, you're going to get colder and colder and your organs will shut down. So two very dangerous conditions if we can't regulate our body temperature. One purposeful misregulation, though, is when you get a fever. So sometimes you have an invader in your body, a bacteria or a virus, and you get a fever. You take your temperature and it says 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body purposely raised your set point by about 4 degrees, 5 degrees, to a point where your body's still safe, but maybe that heat will kill off some of the pathogens that have infected you. If your fever gets to above 105, 106, then you start breaking down your own structures. Your proteins fall apart, and that can be lethal. So fevers need to be monitored, especially as they climb higher and